So that new hotness is flex picks, of course, because G2 had started this kind of revolution of doing different flex picks, but also doing role swaps as well too. And this is kind of the realization or breaking point into, well, rip TL. Speaking of people that can't fucking flex pick or roll swap. Anyways, this is a point in time in which flex picks are very important because it enables your entire team in order to like get an advantage just straight through the draft phase, and it's actually really important. I think more important than a lot of fans or just people, viewers of the game, actually realize, because this isn't a normal thing within any ranked game that you're ever going to play. No one really trades picks a whole lot to allow a counter matchup or anything like that to happen for their team. So this iteration of League of Legends does allow for counter matchups, or at the very least not to get countered, which is probably the more greater thing, I guess, in terms of that. Well, if you have a weak player, then suddenly you can make it or prevent them from actually getting countered and getting hard stomped in the lane. So this is a somewhat of a safety net for you and your team, and maybe someone weaker on your roster that doesn't necessarily have the mechanical skill in order to combat whatever lane opponent that they're against. So a counter matchup is really great, and you don't actually have to save your last pick to get a counter matchup. You can just pick a flex pick, right? And this also has an added benefit of just relieving the coaches from draft mistakes, because we've seen a lot of draft mistakes throughout the years. You know, you have fucking, well, I guess that's all on the part of a player, but Piglet picking Rammus, losing $1 million for Team Liquid. But no, there have been very serious draft mistakes, and this allows for safe drafting, and to where you can pick safe picks or flex picks in the very beginning so that you don't get screwed towards the very end of your draft, because they have no idea where those are going and they have to account for two scenarios instead of just one scenario. So this relieves, I guess, a lot of mishaps and what can happen in the draft if the coach isn't in full control of his players, or he doesn't really have an objective of how he actually wants this game or this champion draft to play out. So this is actually really good for the coach and really good for the analysts and things like that. Now, this problem of flex picks will exacerbate as long as League of Legends continues to get more champions and release more champions within the game at the pace that they're at, or even worse, the pace that they were at before, which I think it was like one new champion every patch or something like that, or might have been every other patch. But still, now we have maybe 5 champions, 4 champions, something like that per year. And it's impossible for Riot to balance several champions to only fit one role, because their philosophy throughout this entire thing has been that they don't want to necessarily constrain the players too much. And as champions, more champions get put in the game, it becomes more difficult to actually determine which champions can go in what roles, because people are eventually going to figure out that, this champion might be a flex pick. So with Riot's philosophy of balance and how they actually make champions, it's very apparent that there are going to be more flexible champions in terms of if they can go top or mid or jungle or even bot lane or support, right? So, and then if we go towards the pro level, as they progress, the upper level pros will be around the same skill level, right? And this is why counter picks are even more important when it comes to the actual meta game of, the professional leagues of LCS or LCK or LEC or whatnot, is the fact that one of the easiest ways to get a leg up on your competition is actually by getting a counter pick. And so once you get a counter pick, it's relatively easy to take advantage of the other player because you know your limitations are far less than their limitations, and they know the vice versa is true as well too. So this is kind of a pseudo way in order for you to actually be able to beat someone that might be better than you. So that's not to say that every player has the capability to actually take advantage of these matchups, but it is a very strong reason as to why you would pick these flex picks, because it allows for, you know, your players to not get destroyed in lane and just ruin the game by 10 minutes. So as this develops, I think this also is going to affect blue side and red side, because there's a really big priority to get the big, you know, first pick champions, because that means that red side has less of an advantage since counter pick is largely irrelevant, right? Because they could just, since blue side is first pick, they can just pick a flex pick or pick the strongest champion, right? Admittedly, you'd probably want to pick the strongest champion, but then you want to pick a ton of flex picks after that in order to compensate for the actual counter pick that red side has. So now this means that red side actually has less of an advantage than it had before in previous iterations of League of Legends. So this means that inherently blue side should be the more advantaged side, along with the fact that this is LoL's dirty secret that blue side has always been more advantaged because of just how the map is set up, but also the camera angle is a lot easier to deal with when you're piloting your champion around and everything. And this iteration of blue and red and the differences between those two also mean that level 1 is more important for scouting, because not only do you have to worry about the flex picks champions, but you have to worry about players flexing into different positions as well too. So say if you get Jace, well, maybe you might actually want to go mid instead of top lane, because that would give, you know, your mid laner a better matchup. So level 1 scouting is probably going to become more of a thing and more relevant as things continue within this trend. And then if you want to talk about players that are actually meeting this new criteria of becoming great and becoming great players because of the innovation of flex picks, is that, well, Perks is obviously the most standout player, because Perks is even more valuable because he has the flex picks that are mainly, you know, towards top, mid, or jungle, but now they can even flex to bot lane with these picks. So he becomes even way more valuable than what originally a bot laner is supposed to be. Now, virtually, this means that G2 can get a counter matchup almost every single game, and their players are good enough to take advantages of that. You know, they're able to actually realize the advantage that they have with these different flex picks, and then play according to that. And then their skill, their mechanical skill, is able to actually back that statement up. So Perks is a prime example of someone who has used this opportunity in order to achieve even greater heights in his level of play. And I think this is going to become one of the new standards when it comes to a criteria for a really great player. And flex picks, they're going to be a part of a legendary player, because imagine if you're a player looking to join a team, right, during free agency, and not, you know, middle of the split. I think this is an easier comparison, but you're a ton more appealing if you can say, I can enable my entire team just through the draft phase. I can play these different types of flex picks, so that means that we can get a counter pick somewhere else, and I can compensate for another player. And that's a really good thing, right? Because if you can compensate for another player, that's fantastic, and they might be able to save salary on another player, right? And you can also demand more salary because you might cover the weaknesses of your other teammates. So this just becomes way more relevant in terms of how dominant a player can be just from the start of draft phase. And then also, of course, the coaches are the ones picking you up too, so it makes their job a lot easier and makes them look good just through the draft phase, because the community sentiment, which also extends over to the professional sentiment as well too, because there's just this inherent narrative that gets run through and eventually ends up seeping into the professional analysis of coaches. But it's that if you have a player that is very flexible, then your drafts are mostly going to be good no matter what. So virtually no one has to say, I'm going to lose lane incredibly hard due to this counter. That counter almost doesn't exist with the ability to flex pick, and I think this is one of the big contributions to this game, and like a revolutionary thing to this game. And if you can also flex your roles as well too, that's another great aspect to flex picks. But just flex picks themselves mean that you are a way more versatile team. The blue side, red side advantage is pretty much null now, and blue side becomes more favored, and you just have a way more versatile roster when you are able to have players that can actually play flex picks, because then you just have this inherent advantage through draft. And towards the upper echelon of players, draft is a very important thing because they are all mechanically matched or somewhat similar in level. So a big way or an easy way to gain an advantage is through a counter matchup. And so this is what flex picks allow you to do. And I think this is actually the newest criteria in which to judge a player in terms of if they will become great or not, or even legendary in some sense.